Maimer, Ois Gimel, that's page Zion in the Hebrew, and we were talking about the difference between Shevet, that idea of Shevet Yisachar bringing on the second day, as opposed to the first day, is similar to the difference between Parshas Shema and Parshas V'hoyim Shemoya. That Parshas Shema has to do with the idea that Shevet Yehuda brought first. And just like we have that there was a havamin to think that Parshas V'hoyim Shemoya should be first said, and then Parshas Shema, and that's why the Gemara has to tell you should know that Parshas Shema has to be said first because of such and such. That means there was a reason to think otherwise. In a similar vein, the idea of Yehuda and Yisachar, who would be the first one to offer the karbonos in the Chanukas HaMizbeach, the very fact that it has to explain that there are reasons why Yehuda preceded, etc., is because there was a reason enough, a strong enough reason, that because of the connection that Yisachar has with Torah, that he should have been the first one. And we explained this has to do with the idea of the Kabbalah's oil, which is the idea of that precedes. That's the idea like Shema precedes V'hoyim Shemoya. First has to be Yekabel all of El Mach Shemayim Tchila, which is with Shema, and then has to be the idea of Yekabel of El Mitzvahs, and that's the same difference he's going to say between Yehuda and Yisachar. So now he's going to explain the association, the connection, the reasons for the precedents, etc. Ois Gimel, line 5, page Zion, the third page of the printouts. The idea behind this is the Kabbalah El Mach Shemayim B'Pashtusu. What is the simple meaning of accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven? Is hakabbalah lekayim rotzen aliyah. One is accepting upon themselves to fulfill the will of above. Seemingly the Rebbe asks a very basic question. This is also the meaning of the idea of accepting upon oneself the yoke of mitzvahs. A person accepts upon himself to fulfill the mitzvahs. What does it mean if he accepts upon himself to fulfill the mitzvahs? When a person accepts upon himself to fulfill a mitzvah, even in the term Kabbalah's oil mitzvahs that we are associating with V'hoyim Shemoya, it's loy mitzadas gula v'schar shebehem. It's not because of the unique properties and characteristics that mitzvahs have, and that every mitzvah has a certain sgula and a certain hamshocha, and because of that we're fulfilling it. Or it's not because of the reward of it. Ki'im, but rather, Kabbalah's, the idea of accepting upon oneself the mitzvahs is Ki'im mitzadei yoisam retzoyne shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A person is fulfilling them because they are the will of Hashem. Like they said in the Birchas HaMitzvahs, Asher Kiddushanu Mitzvahs Vitzivanu, the one that sanctified us in his mitzvahs and he commanded us. Shekiyum HaMitzvahs u'mitzad HaTzivui. The fulfillment of the mitzvahs is because a tzivui, not because of the spiritual benefits, not because of the reward, not because of the skula shebedavar. Shezeu diu kol l'shoin oil mitzvahs. That's why we say, it says you should accept upon yourself oil malchus shamayim before accepting upon yourself the oil of mitzvahs, oil daika, specifically oil. It's an idea of a yoke. You're not doing it for your benefit. You perceive a benefit for you. The fulfillment of the mitzvahs has to be in a way of accepting the yoke because of the command that a person has. To the command that a person was commanded to do it. According to this, it's not understood. What the Chazal said, that you have to preface, you have to say Shema before V'hoyim Shemoya, that first he should accept upon himself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. The Lechura, seemingly the Rebbe asks, what is the benefit What is the advantage of accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven over accepting the yoke of the mitzvahs? The mitzvahs, he's also not doing it because of his own interest. He's doing it because of his bittul to Hashem. So the Rebbe explains in line 19, V'yadu abir bezetz, no explanation of this. Hashakdamas oil malch shemayim la'oil mitzvahs, the prefacing of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven to the yoke of the mitzvahs, he bedugmas hagdamas nasl nishma. It's similar to the idea of prefacing that they said first, we will do, and then we will hear and understand. So now, the Rebbe is going to say a very basic understanding that we need to understand about Nasas coming before Nishma. Don't think that when it says Nishma means just we will hear and understand, and then we will think about it. Maybe, maybe not. No, Nishma means also from the word letzayes, we will listen, meaning like listening to a person's command. I will listen to what you tell me to do. That's what Nishma means. If so, what's the Nasa before Nishma? So he explains in line 21, the Nishma who even without Nasa before Nishma, Nishma means that he accepts upon himself to fulfill everything he will hear. He will listen to it. Also, Nishma is a bittul of accepting the yoke of heaven. Or accepting the yoke. Let's see particularly the difference in heaven and mitzvahs. El Shabitl the Nishma, but the bitl of Nishma, Sheikayim Kol Mashayomer Loi, that he will fulfill everything that he is told. Hu habitl lebchinas retzoynos haprotim. It's the bitl to the individual wills. Sheikayim Kol Rotzen v'Rotzen Chulu, he will fulfill every single will individually, specifically. V'lefnei and before that, there needs to be the prefacing and saying we will do before we will hear or understand or fulfill every individual will. It's the bittul to the master of the will. That's beyond the individual specific wills. Until top of page ches. The bittul to a level of godliness that's beyond even the level of the will. It has nothing to do with the idea of will. It's just Hashem's very being. So that's the difference, and that's the Nasa before the Nishma. That's the idea of the bittul to the Baal HaRotzen. It's not about the individual wills. It's about tapping into a level of godliness that's way beyond everything. That's also what the idea is concerning Shema and V'hoim Shemoya. That first we have to accept the yoke of heaven by saying Shema Yisrael. And only afterwards we accept upon ourselves the yoke of mitzvahs, which is in V'hoim Shemoya. What's the difference between them? The acceptance of the yoke of mitzvahs, that he accepts upon himself to fulfill the individual wills of the mitzvahs in Yanahu Abitl Alarotz. The idea is nullifying oneself to the will. And prior to that has to be the acceptance upon himself of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. That the idea behind this is the bittul to the master of the will that's beyond the will. That's also the difference in the two parshas of Krishma, Shema V'hoim Shemoya. The idea of V'hoim Shemoya has to do with individual wills. For example, it's not like for example, but it's similar to the idea of it says you will gather your grain, your wine, your oil, that indicate that the person is involved with specific and detailed refinements. He's refining certain specific and detailed matters. So the same thing, the V'hoim Shemoya term that's used at the beginning of the parsha means there are specific mitzvahs, specific details, specific things that are being listened to and hearkened to and so on. Mashenkin parsha Shema, as opposed to the parsha of Shema, the first parsha of Krishma, Benegel, close out Torah of mitzvahs concerning the general Torah mitzvahs, but Frab, the pasuk of the Krishma, especially in the first pasuk of Krishma. Shein medaber afil benegel close out Torah mitzvahs, that doesn't even speak about the general idea of Torah mitzvahs. El in Yonah Kabul, so Malch Shemayim, but the idea behind it is accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. It is a Gemara benegel Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Like it's brought down the Gemara concerning Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, that when he was in the middle of learning, and they were wondering, he didn't stop learning. They were wondering if he was, when he read Krishma. So one of his colleagues, one of the Talmidim said, "Shebeshosh ma'avir yadav al panav," when at the time that he would cover pass his hands over his face. B'amiris pasuk Rishon, when he said the first pasuk of Krishma, Mekabel el Malch Shemayim, he's accepting upon himself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. And now because of that, we have also a very important halacha. He says, "V'lachein the pasuk Rishon, the Kriyas Shema ma'akevas hagavon b'diavad." Therefore, in the first pasuk of Kriyas Shema, if a person did not have intention, did not listen, did not hear what they were saying, did not pay attention to the point of the first pasuk of Shema, so then he has to repeat it. How come? Lefisha pasuk zehu iker kabbalas malch shemayim. Only this pasuk is the primary acceptance of the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. After accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, that's in the first pasuk. It's the idea of prefacing. We will do before we will hear and understand habitl the balarots, and when sublimating ourselves to the master of the will. After that, the Kabbalah or mitzvahs needs to be accepting upon ourselves the yoke of mitzvahs shekoilol gam oil Torah, that includes also the yoke of Torah. So we have this idea of Kabbalah oil mitzvahs is similar to and includes the oil Torah, but before the oil Torah, which we're going to lead to, has to do with Yisachar. We said he's the Bali Torah. Before that has to be the Kabbalah's oil, the general, Bitla Balarotz. This same order was B'matan Torah Kedisa, B'mechilta, like it's brought down Mechilta, Kablu Malchusi, V'acharkach Egzer Alechem Gzeres, accept my kingship, and afterwards I will decree upon you decrees. That's what Hashem was saying by the time of Matan Torah. That the idea of accepting Hashem's kingship is something separate. That's why it began on Noicha Hashem Elokecha to say that Eibishter is king, and that's higher than decrees and all the Aseres HaDibros that followed it. Top of page test. But Chilon initially, tzarechli is Kabla Malchusi, has to be accepted upon yourself my kingship, habitl lebalarots, and the bitl to the master of the will. Barak lacher is a exar lechem gzeres, and only afterwards I will decree upon you decrees, which means the Mechilta uses the term I will decree upon you decrees. It includes the oil of Torah that we said before. The yoke of Torah is part of oil mitzvahs, the yoke of the mitzvahs. So now we're going to take this back to the Nesiim in our parsha about who led the Chanukas HaMizbeach, who led the Chanukas HaMizbeach in the Korbanos. Oizdal. Zel Gam Seder the Korbanos HaNesiim. This is also the order of the Korbanos of the heads of the tribes. Shabbatchila Hikriv Degel Rishon. Initially, the first flag brought their offerings. As we know, the Klal Yisrael, the 12 Shvatim were divided into the 4 flags, 3 Shvatim per flag. Who was the first flag that led the camp in the travels in the Midbar? Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun. These three. So he says, Yehuda, who in bitl kabol so mal shemaim. Yehuda is the idea of bitl, of accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. Like it says that when Leah named Yehuda, she said, Apam oida savayir. Now I will thank, and the idea of oida is included in it. Also the idea of bitl, I will accept and be mavat myself to Hashem. This is also what Nachshon ben Aminadav of Shevet Yehuda was about. Chazal state, why was he called by the name Nachshon? That he was the first one to enter into the stream, the waves, the roiling sea, that by the splitting of the sea that hadn't split yet, he jumped in first before it even split, because Moshe Rabbeinu said that to travel into the sea. The idea that Nachshon ben Aminadav was the first one to jump in the sea is the idea of self-sacrifice. Because he was the idea of Kabbalah's oil, which is Kabbalah's oil, Malch Shemayim, self-sacrifice is identical. Therefore, he was the one that brought the Karbanos of Nasim on the first day. Afterwards, the second day was brought by the leader of Shevet Yisachar. Like we said before, Yisachar was the idea of Torah study. Afterwards, a Nasi of the Shevet of Zvulun. Mitzvahs, the idea of mitzvahs, because we know Yisachar and Zvulun is the idea of Yeshvei Oyel Bali Asik. Those are involved in Torah study, and those are involved in business. Those are involved in business are not removed from Chas V'Shalom Kedusha, but rather they are being involved in worldly things, so they could be able to perform the mitzvahs that have to do with the world. They are involved in business, so they have all the laws of business. They're involved in agriculture, so they're involved in all the mitzvahs having to do with agriculture, etc. So that's why he says in line 16, this the idea that the carbon of the Shevet Yisachar was on the second day of the consecration of the Chanukah Mizbeach, la'achri carbon the Shevet Yehuda, following the carbon of Shevet Yehuda. Though because of the advantage and quality of the Torah, the carbon of Shevet Yehuda should have been in the first, Shevet Yisachar should have been the first day because of the greatness of the Torah. Initially has to be the bitl of accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, which is the idea of Yehuda. Just like Shema has to come first, just like Nasa comes first. And this is similar to what it's known, that in the day, in our daily life, there's that precedence as well. Not just in the Krishma of our daily life, the Shema versus Voim Shmoya, not just by Har Sinai, Nasa before Nishma, and not only in the bringing of the Karbonos from the Siyam of Yehuda Yisachar, but in our what we do when we get up during the day. The main quality of being involved in Torah is following the avoid of davening. Like Binyamin said, Alt Filosi, that he said concerning, he said, Alt Filosi states, Muchal Mitasi, he said that my tefillah should be close to my bed. I should not interrupt between getting up in the morning with anything to my davening, not even to study Torah before my davening. What is the indication? That the first thing that he does is the idea of davening. Initially has to be the bittul. Shabbat top of page Yud, who not feel the general idea of davening. Beginning from the bittul of saying, reciting Moedani at the beginning of the day. Vadla bittul kav the kama mada until he reaches Shemoneh Esrei, which is like the bittul of a servant standing in front of his master. And only after prefacing and having the bittul and davening, So then the quality of his Torah study is a much higher level because it's been infused with the bittul and been prepped with the bittul of davening beforehand. Additional to this, according to what it's known, that all matters in Torah have a general way how they are presented, and they have a specific and detailed way. So too, it's concerning the idea of bittul, of prefacing nasa to nishma. So in general, it's the idea of saying Baidani Vavayasat Phil on the Vaida of davening, Shakaidim Limrat Torah, it's prior to Torah study. In Beprotius Yeshna Gam in Habitl. Specifically, there's also the idea of bittul kefishu belimud Torah guf. In Torah itself, there's the level of bittul. In other words, just like in davening, there's also the nasa and nishma part, the shma and vayim shemaya. Same thing in Torah learning. Everything has its two phases of the bittul and then the study. Like it says, my soul should be like dust before all. And through having that preface, through having the bittul, open up my heart in your Torah. So we see even in Torah learning, we need to have the bittul preceding it. And it's not just that the bittul has to precede it before he starts learning, but even during the learning process itself, there has to be the bittul. Add to such a degree, bittul the nafshikof l'kafar l'koltia tzarich liyas gam be'islim l'Torah gufa, until we're saying that my soul, the bittul of my soul, should be like dust before all, has to be also during Torah study itself. K'mayim as all the Chazal say, kol Talmud Chacham ha'yoshev nei rabbi, any Talmud Chacham that sits before his master, ve'ein sifsoisav noitfis mar, and his lips are not dripping bitter. In other words, he doesn't have this type of awe and bittul. It's not going to be a positive experience. It's not going to be an appropriate Torah study. So we see even during the Torah study, when he's already sitting in front of his Rebbe, he has to have the level of bittul. And therefore, we get back to our topic, line 16, that's why initially there had to be the carbon of Nachshon ben Aminadav, of Shevet Yehuda, Barak Lacher is a Hikriv Shevet Yisachar. Only after Yehuda, which is the idea of bittul, in Kabbalah Sel Machal Shemaim Tchila, then was the idea of Yisachar brought the sacrifices, Al Derech Hakdamas HaBittul L'Tfilah Leis KaTorah, similar to the prefacing of the bittul of davening before you learn Torah. VaBittul Shbeis KaTorah Gufa, and also similar to how you need to have bittul in Torah learning itself, also prior to the next stage, in the second stage in Torah study, you have the bittul in the first stage. Became, despite that quality of Yehuda that made him take precedence before Shevet Yisachar, still in all, Shevet Yisachar him nosnu eitzel l'nesiyim. Rashi brings us down also that the Shevet Yisachar gave the advice to all of the leaders of all the Shvatim, Gam l'Nachshon ben Aminadav l'Mat Yehuda, even to Nachshon ben Aminadav, to Shevet Yehuda, that they have the Maila of Kabbalah Soil Malch Shamayim, the bittul. He was the one that advised them, Lisnadav Karbonos Halalu, to donate these Karbonos, because this information itself had to come from Torah. The very fact that there has to be the prefacing of davening to Torah. How do you know that? The bittul has to precede it. Yoidim Zois Ma Torah, we know this from Torah itself. So therefore, Yisachar had to inform Yehuda, but in actuality, in practice, Yehuda brought it first to indicate the avoida has to first be in bittul, and then there could be the avoida of Torah.